Welcome into this is episode 2 now of this WSOU Sports Zoom talk. We don't have an official title yet, but how you guys doing so far? I'm here with Liam Plate and Justin Morris. I'm Jorie Mickens. How you guys doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to be able to still talk some sports for WSOU, even though we're all cooped up in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, likewise. Cooped up in the house, but definitely loving the sports talk, and hopefully we'll definitely get into this, but hopefully we'll be seeing the return of sports very, very soon because I'm deprived.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we'll definitely cover that later, but I think it would be only right to start off with, Seton Hall sports. And, last week, Wilner Lewis, our sports director, and Heaven Hill, Michael Daly, those three, they all talked about, the incoming players for both the women's and men's team, kind of like what they expect for this season. I figure we do a little bit of the same as well. We can start with the men's team here. So who's one player that you guys are really excited to see this upcoming season? And yeah, we'll start with the men's team. Either of you guys can go first.
Personally, I'm gonna say Bryce Aiken. I feel like we definitely, in terms of a recruiting standpoint, we definitely have lost out on a few high-notch prospects. So, talking about some of the 4-star, 5-star recruits that we've targeted, Earl Timberlake was one that we lost out on. Matthew Alexander Moncrief was another one that I thought, personally would be likening to the Hall. He actually ended up choosing Oklahoma State. But Bryce Aiken, the Jersey product, who we actually recruited before he ended up going to Harvard, I'm really excited to see what he would do. I feel like a lot of people were really, really disappointed, obviously, with the outcome of the season and not really getting to see what Miles Powell would be able to do in a tournament-type standing. That was definitely me. That was definitely a lot of people that I know as well, and I think that would have really boosted his draft stock. But Bryce Aiken, to me, he's not the second coming of Miles Powell. No one can really be another Miles Powell, but he's definitely, what Coach Willard would be looking for in terms of replacement scorer. He's seasoned. He's already, had a lot of Division I years under his belt. Harvard's not the best, or not a part of the best conference in terms of basketball, but they do play a lot of highly touted and high-level competition. And he's just a proven scorer. He averaged over 20 last year at Harvard before getting injured. And injuries have definitely been something that he's had to deal with. But I'm really excited to see what he can do. He's definitely a volume scorer, can put it up and put it in the basket at all three levels, mid-range, three-point landing inside as well. And I think he's definitely a leader as well. And that Jersey touch that he brings will be something that I think, will definitely be able to just mesh well with the other players on the squad. So Bryce Aiken is my number one.
For me, I actually went with a returning player. I think I'm excited to see how Sherman Reynolds does this year, because last year he really came into his role as kind of like the second main defender, like the second best defensive player. Now with Quincy McKnight gone, he's going to have to step up and be the player that guards the opposing team's best player. So I'm excited to see how he handles that role, because this is a guy who started out in his sophomore year not getting too many minutes, and now last year he's playing important minutes in important games. So I'm excited to see, especially with Quincy leaving. I think he can step up big and really play a big role for this team, not only on the defensive side of the floor, but if he's able to develop his offensive game a little bit over the summer and get a little bit better. Obviously, he's a great shooter, but I think if he's able to get inside more and be a little bit more aggressive, I think he can really bring a lot to this team, a lot that some people might not expect him to be, that kind of player who can do it on both sides. And a lot of people think he'll just mainly be a defensive player, but I think if he's able to develop his offensive game a little bit more, he can be dangerous on the offensive side of the ball. But I am excited to see how he does in that defensive role, being the number one guy, because he's a great defensive player. He's so quick. He always has his hands out. So I think he'll be good. I'm excited to see how he fills in that role.
Yeah, and I think those are two really good picks. I'm really excited, especially to see Bryce Aikens, because we don't know too much about him, given that he's just coming in as a transfer. But I'm definitely excited to see him. And Javar, we know what he can do. But if I had to choose a player, I'd say Jared Roden. I'm not sure what it is about Jared Roden that I like so much. Maybe it's because we're both juniors or upcoming juniors this year or something. But I've always, yeah, I've always just liked his game. I think he just plays with such a great passion and an intensity that I think it's just going to translate throughout the whole team. Last year, he was one of the best rebounders in the conference, despite being only like 6'6". And I think he just plays, like I said, with such intensity, and it's just going to go throughout the entire team. I think defensively as well. We talked so much about Romaro Gill last year and Quincy McKnight last year and how they were just hounds on the defensive side of the floor. Gill with his shot blocking ability, and Quincy McKnight, he basically was able to disrupt any perimeter player that he faced throughout the entire season. But I think Roden, he kind of got overlooked last year. And I think his impact on the defensive end is going to be key for the Pirates' success this year. And then offensively, I want him to take a leap as well. I think, we know what Mamu can do. And, he'll be a go-to scorer, I think, for the Pirates this year. I think Roden, he's also has a lot of experience in this program and under Coach Willard, with Bryce Aiken coming in, we know he can score, but it might take some time for him to get situated, with their game plan, their schemes and everything. But I think Roden, just the mix of the experience and his potential, I think he's going to have a great year this year. And another piece of news that, came out, I guess it was yesterday or so, Seton Hall, they are finalizing a home-and-home series with both Penn State and Rhode Island. I believe that the Penn State game would open up the season for the Pirates. It'll be the season opener for both the Pirates and Penn State. So do you guys have anything to say about that? I think, I'm pretty sure the Pirates, they haven't played Penn State in quite some time. I believe their last matchup was in 2006. So it's been a while since, those two teams have faced off. So, just, I guess, putting together a schedule this early in the season. Last year we know what Coach Willard did with that gauntlet of a non-conference schedule that he put together, and that really prepared the Pirates for the Big East conference play. And you know how tough that was last year. So I think Coach Willard is doing the right thing here, putting Penn State and Rhode Island both in their non-conference schedule.
I think it's big. I mean, we saw Penn State last year become a top 25 ranked team, and then the toughness that they bring from the Big Ten. I think it'll be interesting to see how Seton Hall can match up against another Big Ten team. We saw them take down Maryland the past 2 years, but I think Penn State's a little different than Maryland, a different type of team. And then, of course, Rhode Island coming from the A10, obviously not as tough of a conference as the Big Ten or the Big East, but I do think that they bring another element to the game. Because Rhode Island was pretty much, I think they were like the second best team in the A10 last year, behind Dayton, who was top 5 in the nation. But I do think it'll be good for the Pirates, and we're seeing Coach Willard build that aggressive schedule again with both Penn State, Rhode Island, and Baylor later as well. So I think it's good for the Pirates, especially with this team without big guys, their main players like Powell, McKnight, and Gill coming back. And some new players, they got to get used to that big-time basketball that they're going to face in the Big East when they play teams like Villanova and Creighton twice a year. So I think it's good to start it out early, especially with Penn State being their first game. I think it'll be good for them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Liam. And, the teams in the Big East that were really high contenders for the Pirates, you talk about Villanova and you talked about Creighton as well, and also some other teams that are, I think, going to be some pretty solid lineups coming into that conference next year. They have a lot of their foundations still intact. So Nova's obviously losing Sadiq Bey, but they are returning a pretty good portion of their players from last year, and so is Creighton as well. So I think, Seton Hall has really had the biggest turnaround in terms of who they've lost. And so that non-conference schedule, like you mentioned, especially that Baylor game, who at one point we all know they were ranked number 1 in the country last year. I think that is definitely, kudos to Kevin Willard on his side in terms of scheduling. We saw them play huge non-conference games last year with the Gavitt Games tip-off against Michigan State, which, we saw what happened with that one. But even so, in that game, Miles Powell dropped 37. He, sprays Michigan State with a bunch of three-pointers on a bad ankle, and we almost ended up winning that game. But his non-conference scheduling has always been top tier, and that's really what's helped the Pirates get to as many NCAA tournaments as they have overall. And so this year it's the same exact thing. He wanted to give us that Big Ten flavor with Penn State. Baylor, like you mentioned already, is a great school in terms of ferociousness and boarding on the defensive end as well. So to me, this is really, the top year that Seton Hall has to schedule top non-conference opponents, especially with the huge turnaround and losing a guy like Miles Powell, who we haven't played without him in 4 years. So, it's definitely a big year in terms of seeing what the team is going to look like and how they'll match up with non-conference opponents before the toughest part of the schedule. And Kevin Willard has succeeded once again.
Yeah, those are all great points, I think. It just shows how much Kevin Willard trusts this team, even though they're losing this 3 seniors that were, huge pieces on that team last year, and Powell and McKnight and Gill. I think he still trusts his team. He still has, firm belief that they can, be just as good as they were last year. And I think that kind of transitions in what – do you guys have any overall predictions for the men's team? And we'll get into the women's team in a second, but just, quick prediction. What do you think they'll finish or how they'll fare this season?
I'm going to say third in the Big East is my prediction for the conference overall. Overall record, I think that's kind of a lot to do. So I'm going to just say third in the Big East behind Creighton and Nova again, which it shouldn't have been like last year, but
Yeah.
Third.
No, yeah, I'd have to agree with Justin. Obviously, Villanova and Creighton are going to be the 2 best teams in the conference next year just because they're not losing that many players and they have great coaching staffs. But I think Seton Hall, they can surprise a lot of people this year. I think they'll finish top 5 at least, but I do think they can get to that 3rd ranking or maybe even tie for 2nd. As we saw Creighton surprise the Big East this past year, I think Seton Hall can do that same thing because they add a lot of new players, but I think Kevin will be able to get them to create that team chemistry early on, and that they'll be able to use that strong non-conference schedule to their advantage and kind of prepare themselves to play these big-time teams twice a year.
Yeah, and I probably have to agree with you guys. I'd say they'll probably finish 3rd this year. Like you guys all mentioned, I think outside of really Villanova, I think every team really lost some key pieces. Creighton lost Tyshawn Alexander, who's going to be in the draft. St. John's, they lost Mustafa Heron, and they might lose Figueroa to the draft as well. Providence, they're losing Alpha Diallo. Georgetown, their whole roster basically is now gone. Xavier, they're going to lose Najee Marshall and Tyreek Jones. So I think just a lot of teams really lost pieces. And, we talk about how Seton Hall is losing their big pieces, but I think a lot of teams in the Big East lost a lot of pieces too. And I think, they'll probably finish 3rd in the Big East this year. But I think now we can move over to the women's side of things. Do you guys have one player that you're excited to see for the women's team this year?
Personally, I would say Lauren Park Lane. I think she's really going to make a huge jump from her freshman year to her sophomore year. And she was really a highly touted recruit coming into the program. She's definitely not the biggest player, but I think she really is one of the biggest players in terms of heart and in terms of, just being a really mental focal point in terms of that team, and also just bringing the team together and just playing with a real fiery passion that is hard to see amongst a freshman point guard. And so I really think she had some big moments last year. She's really a driving, slashing type of scorer when she does score. And most of the time she's looking to facilitate in terms of the point guard spot. But I think she's really, the quintessential point guard in terms of what Coach Bozzella is looking for. And that's why, he slotted her into that starting role basically as soon as she stepped on campus. And so I think, being able to mesh well and be a leader, because as a point guard, you have to be a leader, with a bunch of seniors last year, Alexis Lewis, Shadeen Samuels, Barbara Johnson, and kind of guiding those girls to really, be their best selves. I think now going into her sophomore year, where she's still an underclassman, but she's definitely going to be, one that's looked to a whole lot more to really lead the charge and I think score on the offensive end as well. She didn't really put up a whole lot of shots last year. Most of the time when she scored, it would, be a floater or a jumper inside or a layup on a fast break. But I think if she can really get that game going in terms of outside scoring and also just continue her just fiery competitiveness on both the offensive and defensive ends, I think she's really going to have a big season and be really key for Coach Bozzella.
Yeah, I'd say for me, I think it's good. I think Femi Funis. I'm excited to see what she's able to do because obviously with Shadeen Samuels leaving, there's going to be a big hole to fill underneath. And I mean, you have Desiree Elmore, who who obviously will fill that role, but I do think Femi Funis will be able to help fill that hole as well because last season she didn't really play too much because she was coming off an injury. But I think if she's able to get good minutes this season and that she's able to get good production underneath, which she was able to get in the few games she appeared in limited time last season. I do think that she can play a big role for this team, and I'm excited to see what she can do now that she's had a lot more time to recover from her injury, and that she'll be back healthy 100% come this season. Hopefully, Coach Bozzella gives her the chance to showcase her talent and that she's able to show that she can provide for this team and that she's able to step up into the role that they're going to need.
Yeah, and I think those are both great picks. For me, I think I have to go Alexia Alesh. I think last year, like you mentioned, Liam, with Samuels gone, Shadeen Samuels gone, Alexis Lewis gone, Barbara Johnson gone, and Selena Philoxy now gone. I think that there's just going to be a big spot in the rotation for her, given that she'll be a forward or a big, down low. And when you look at all the freshmen, the incoming freshmen, and all the transfers, the Pirates didn't really get too many pieces for their front court. And I think that there's just a huge opening for Alesh to, just be there and contribute for this team. Last year, she didn't play, she played 22 games, but she only played 9.8 minutes per game. So I think, when she does get the minutes, she is, a valuable piece for that team. And I think, like I said, and like you said, Liam, with all those pieces gone, I think that there's just going to be an open spot there for her. And I think she'll be a starter for the Pirates this year too, next to Desiree Elmore. And I think those two in that front court are going to be really, it's going to be successful this year. And I think it's going to work. So I would have to pick Alesh for sure. But same thing with the men's team. Do you guys have, or same thing like we did for the men's team? Do you guys have any predictions for the women's team this year?
I don't know. Well, obviously there's a new top dog in the conference with UConn coming in. They're obviously going to be the best team. But I do think I think Seton Hall, I think they can finish middle of the pack. I mean, obviously losing Shadeen Samuels, Barbara Johnson, Alexis Lewis is a big hit to take because they're all very talented, and I think especially the loss of Shadeen Samuels. I think if Desiree Elmore is able to fill that role a little bit, and then we got the Pirates get help from people like Funis, and then obviously like you said, Jorie Alesh, and then if Lauren Park Lane and Maya Jackson can shore up the guard play, because I do think this team will be more pushed by guard play this season. I do think the guard play is going to be the most important part. I do think that they can finish somewhere in the middle of the pack, somewhere around 5th or 6th. I mean, I don't think they're going to be especially great, but I do think that they have a good shot to make some noise in the Big East tournament, and then I think they'll end up in the NIT at the end of the season.
Yeah, I honestly am gonna have to agree with you completely on that, Liam. I think just the transition from their offense into really being a heavy guard, centered regime is definitely going to be something that limits them, but I don't think it'll completely kill them. So a transition from someone like Shadeen Samuels leading the offensive charge, and then players like Des Elmore and Alexis Lewis, who was more of a forward, but more like a point forward, could bring the ball up and still facilitate, but definitely was a bigger presence inside and could bang down low with a lot of those girls. I think that's definitely going to be a hard transition for them to try to complete. And especially, with the newcomers that are coming in as well, they're really guard heavy too. There's, we have the transfer from Penn State. We have McKenna Minter, who's actually the daughter of former NFL safety Mike Minter, Skylar Treadwell. So there's a lot of, guards that are coming into the fold as well. And so, unless Femi Funis can become Shadeen Samuels 2.0, which those are really hard shoes to fill. And then, like you mentioned, Jorie Alexia Alesh, I think they both have tremendous roles and shoes to fill, but I don't think that transition is going to be necessarily a smooth one that will result in them, finishing at the top of the pack. They still have contenders to face like DePaul, who, really ran the table in the Big East last year on the women's side. And then, of course, UConn coming in. We already know the storied history that they have. So I'm going to have to say middle of the pack again because they really finished, towards the top with a late charge at the end of the season last year. So, and that was really, spurred like by players like Shadeen Samuels. And so without those veteran leadership presences there, I don't think it's going to be easy faring for them. And I'm going to have to say NIT finish as well.
Yeah, and last year we saw like 4 teams, I believe, that finished with the same conference record. So I don't know if we're gonna see that again this year, but I'd have to agree with you guys. I'd say they're gonna finish 5th in the Big East. I think UConn, like you guys mentioned, that powerhouse with Paige Buchers coming in, that incoming freshman, she could literally be the best player in women's college basketball next year. She has that ability. She's that good. I think Marquette, they're returning basically their whole team. I think Selena Lon on Marquette, she could be one of the best players in the conference next year, and I think they might actually take over DePaul for that second place spot behind UConn. I think DePaul will finish 3rd. They lost Shante Stonewall, but they're also returning a lot of their pieces from last year. And I think that St. John's, that was really the middle of the pack that Seton Hall couldn't really get over last year. But I think, with the players that they're returning with Leilani Correa, I think that I think that core there in St. John's, it might be too much for Seton Hall to handle. I think Seton Hall will finish 5th. I think that's a good finishing there, though. Given that this team lost a lot of seniors and a lot of depth, but I think that they'll have a pretty good season, like you guys mentioned. I think they'll probably make it to the NIT as well. So I think we can stick in college basketball in general, but kind of transition to another topic outside of Seton Hall sports. So in the news recently, there's been a lot of prospects. NBA prospects, they're kind of foregoing their choice to go to college. And most recently, the number 1 overall recruit in the 2021 class, he announced his top 5 landing spots, and them being Duke, Kentucky, Auburn, Texas Tech, and the NBA G League. We already saw some top prospects like Jalen Green. He's going to the G League. Daisha Nix and Isaiah Todd. Those 3 are all going to the G League. Those are all top players in the 2020 class. So my question is this a trend that the NCAA should be worried about?
I definitely think it is a trend that the NCAA should be worried about, and especially you have the number 1 overall prospect, last year, Jalen Green opting for G League waters, and I think that, really above. I mean, we've seen a similar trend before. LaMelo Ball went overseas to go play with the IBL and go play with in Australia, and then RJ Hampton as well was a big recruit who decided to opt for the overseas route instead of going to the NCAA. I just think with the further conversation of paying athletes and basically saying, okay, you're not going to be this, monopolized organization that controls what these athletes are doing and are profiting off of their contributions to your sport without having any type of, reparations for them or any payback for it. I think that, basically the ability to see other people doing it and taking these alternate routes and still getting to the NBA is really changing the viewpoints of a lot of these top recruits in their eyes. And really, I think Jalen Green did a huge thing in terms of just changing that overall scope. I don't think that we're going to see a bunch of recruits. I don't think it's going to all of a sudden become 50-50 in terms of recruits are now just opting to go to the G League or go overseas. But this has been a conversation that's been spurred for a really long time. Even when, LaMelo was a sophomore in high school, we saw LeVar create the JBL, which was another option for players to be able to kind of skip the college route and get to the league without having to go through college and still get paid for it. And so at the end of the day, I mean, and a lot of these players too really do need money at the end of the day and have, the ability to get it from an overseas standpoint or go to the G League to get money. So if you're an 18-year-old kid and, you're offered a $50,000 contract to go pro and you could still get to the NBA, which is your ultimate goal, or, have the traditionalism and the lure of the NCAA calling, but you're not going to get anything from it. That's a really hard decision to make. And a lot of times, those dollar signs are going to be in the eyes of those 18-year-olds. And, as one who was 18 not too long ago myself, I think
Mhm.
that I would
Yeah.
probably opt for the money as well. So it's definitely changing the trend for sure.
I don't know, because I think there's always been players who have gone overseas first for a year to play instead of playing college basketball. One that comes to mind is Brandon Jennings,
Yep.
who did that a few years ago. But I don't know. I think Justin, you bring up a good point. When you're 18 years old and you're a lot of these the best players, they want to make the money first because they need it for their families and they want to take care of the people around them. I think that's going to be a big contributing factor, especially since players that they can't get paid in college, at least the money that they would like to get paid, like the $50,000 contract. But I don't know. I do think there's still going to be some players, obviously, who want to play college basketball for the tradition of it, to get that national championship, or to get exposure. But then if you bring something in like the G League, where now you can play almost professional basketball, but you don't have to go overseas. You can stay in the United States, and you can get exposure there to NBA teams. I think that completely changes it a lot now that it's actually in the U.S. But I don't know. I think it's going to be tough. Obviously, the 2020 top prospect did it, and then this year's the 2021. That's one of his 5 landing spots. I think obviously it changes it because all it takes is one player to do it, and then everyone else is like going to be like, maybe I should do that too and get paid instead of just going to college for 1 year. Because I mean, you go to college for 1 year and you plan on being one and done, then what's the point of taking those classes that you're not going to use or anything, and you can just go to school after your basketball career is over? I'm not sure. I think it definitely changes something, but I do think there's still going to be that pool of players who want to play college basketball, want to play for schools just for the tradition of it to keep it going, kind of like kind of how like there's a big tradition of like college basketball in like the Big East, like still get that kind of feeling of playing in a big time conference like the ACC, the SEC, that kind of thing. I do think that's still going to be a factor, but I don't know. I think you start throwing that money in their face and that you could make this instead of going to take classes at college and still playing basketball. I think players would rather focus on just playing basketball instead of having to go to school too.
Yeah, and I think you took my point where I think that it's now in the United States. We talk about LaMelo Ball, who is considered a top 5 pick in this year's draft. I haven't watched a single game of his because there's really no place to watch them. He's playing over in Australia, but now that he's in the United States, you could see some of these G League games probably on national television at some point. Given that they have these top prospects playing, it would make sense, for someone like ESPN or NBA TV to have them on TV. So I think the exposure for these players, and I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's now in the United States. It's right here. You don't have to leave your home country to play and get paid. And I think definitely for the top schools, like the Dukes and the Kentuckys, the schools that rely on those one and done players, I think those are the ones that really need to be concerned, because they're going to miss out on a lot of these top prospects because they just can't pay them. But I guess my next, really, you guys kind of answered that question. The question I have next: do you think more of these athletes are going to take this route in the future, or do you think this is kind of going to be just a few players every year?
I think I said it before. I think all it takes is one. So I think obviously the number one prospect in the 2020 class doing it kind of set an example of saying you don't have to go to a big school to play. But that's something I didn't think about, Jory, is that it really is the Dukes, the Kentuckys that have to worry about it, and not so much the smaller schools such as Seton Hall or St. John's or Villanova, or even like schools like Michigan State or Virginia, the schools that have guys coming back consistently that want to play for 4 years out of college. So I do think it really is. I mean, I think if it's going to be any players, I think it's more so going to be like the top like the top 5, that area, those guys are really going to be the ones that I think are going to, because I think for some of the other guys who are just like maybe top 30, top 20, they're going to want to get a little more exposure and going to want to go to a college that fits their game, where they can get developed by a Krzyzewski or a Calipari or one of the big time head coaches. I think it's going to be, I think it'll mainly be the top 5 players, like top 10 prospects, but and then like the top 20 guys, like the people that are like 10 through 20, I think that they'll keep going to college. But I don't know, you could really see it changing any day now. But I think the NCAA will be okay even without it, because people are still going to tune into college basketball. People are still going to buy tickets to the games. They're still going to watch the tournament, no matter if these guys are going to play in the NCAA or not. So I do think I feel like I expect it just to be like the top guys in the country to do it, and then the other guys will go to college to kind of develop themselves a little bit more, since they're not really ready for an NBA type atmosphere.
Yeah, I definitely completely agree, and I think you look at a school like Seton Hall, for example. Miles Powell was a 4-year player and came back last year after kind of testing the NBA draft waters, because he was basically told, you should come back to get your game better. You're not ready yet, even though he was 21, 22 years old at that time. Same thing with Sandro Mamikilishvili. Was he decided to test the draft waters and see what that would look like, and wasn't necessarily told to come back, but decided to come back just because of that same exact thing. He wasn't necessarily ready. And so when you talk about schools like Duke and Kentucky and, UNCs, for example, or just Kansas or those schools that really sometimes, especially like Kentucky, that serve as just, the one and done factories of the world, that are sending John Walls and DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davises straight to the league just because they have to go through the college, gauntlet. I think that they're really going to have, a tough time, because would you rather go to Kentucky for 1 year or get $50,000, $100,000 to play for a few months and then go to the NBA? But those schools, like you mentioned, like a Seton Hall or, one Villanova, for example, that really emphasize just fostering, not only good education and good values as, a young man coming into the program and trying to leave as, a seasoned kind of grown man ready for the world, but also work on your game in the process. I think those schools are going to be perfectly fine. And the NCAA does have its own, kind of lure and draw that it definitely gives players, where, you just look at our backgrounds. I mean, that's a crazy, environment and just thing that you can't get in a G League type of level. It's just something about the atmosphere and the tradition of all of it that just makes, the NCAA unlike anything else. So if you take, those top prospects, I think money talks and they'll take the money. But I think the NCAA is far from, losing out on any type of substantial player pools coming in. I think they'll be perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I think I'd have to agree with you guys. I don't know if a ton of the high school athletes, the top recruits, will probably end up in the G League, but I think that'll just give the opportunity for some of the guys, that aren't ranked so high, to just step up on these teams and become even better than they would have been, playing alongside the best player in the country or whatever it is. So I think in that case, yeah, and college does have its allure to some people. Some people just want to get a degree. You saw a lot of these seniors, they just come back just to get their degree, not necessarily wanting to go to the NBA. They just want to play some basketball. And I think that'll forever be, a reason why people want to choose college over getting paid. But I think we covered college basketball pretty well so far, and I think it's time to move on to a little bit of professional basketball. And I guess we can start with The Last Dance, which ended last Sunday, a week ago. The last 2 episodes of Michael Jordan's documentary about his career with the Chicago Bulls and the final season in Chicago. Did you guys have a favorite moment of the docuseries?
Well, personally, I can say that, man, that whole thing was definitely crazy. Um, yeah, I love The Last Dance. It was the most that I've learned about Michael Jordan ever. I feel like, as a sports fan, and you guys could probably attest to this, we've seen plenty of Michael Jordan, not just highlights. I've seen full games. I mean, NBA TV shows those. ESPN Classic used to show those, and so I feel like a lot of times when older people try to get into debates about who's the GOAT, they're saying, "Oh, well, you never seen Michael play. You don't know what it's like, blah 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 blah," right? And I'd be like, "What are you talking about? Of course I've seen him play. Like I got NBA TV." But I think just the the inner kind of revelations of how dedicated and emotionally driven he was by the game and just being the best was absolutely crazy to me. And even seeing him, I think one part that stuck out to me, and there was a lot, but his little speech, I think it was at the end of episode 7, where he just was pretty much almost crying
Yeah.
at the time.
Yep.
And he was like, "Man, I played the way I played because I wanted to win so bad, but I also wanted my teammates to enjoy that with me." And basically saying, if you don't want to play that way, then don't. But you're not going to win anything. He was feeling that to this day, and so a lot of people like to say a lot of different things about Michael Jordan, the type of person he was, and how he, from time to time would curse out his teammates and even hit him at some points. But yeah, oh man, all of it was just really crazy to see what kind of person he was. But I think it was really a true testament to his just complete, almost near insane level of commitment to being great. And I think anybody in any field can take that and some of the pieces out of, his legacy and the way that he worked, not necessarily saying you have to gamble a whole bunch of stuff away or, become crazy, but take, his work ethic and some of the things that he tried to do. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was just him saying, I never asked anybody to do something that I wouldn't do. So just his complete level of commitment and dedication to his craft was, amazing to me. And that's probably the biggest part that stuck out.
No, yeah, Justin, you took the words right. I mean, that was hands down my favorite part of the documentary. Just that last bit, I was like, oh my gosh, wow! Like, I mean, especially the part when he said that he pushed his teammates because he wanted them to enjoy the winning with him, not only just because he wanted it for himself, but he wanted it for the whole team. And I think that's one of the parts that stuck out to me because everyone talks about Michael being the best player ever and that he carried the team. But I mean, you really look at it, he kind of got those guys involved more and that he helped them discover what role they needed to play for the whole team to be successful and for them to win those 6 championships. I don't think they win those championships without the whole supporting cast there. And obviously, I think another thing, like you said, he didn't ask his teammates to do anything that he didn't do. So I think that's one thing that as a leader of a team, you can't be bossing people around and telling them to do stuff. You have to be able to willing to do the work with them. So I think that's the biggest thing about that showed his leadership, his mentality, his mindset. I think that's the whole thing that I think a lot of athletes can take away from and kind of dedicate that to them or take that mindset to their own career and even play. And then even people who aren't athletes anymore, who used to be, they can kind of take that mindset to their job that they have now in the real world. I mean, I think it's something great to kind of inspire a lot of people to kind of think about that way in life, and that if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to push people. You have to be willing to not be liked by everyone because not everyone's going to like you if you want to be successful. But then on a more of a lighter side, I loved every single part of Dennis Rodman in that documentary. I love Dennis Rodman. I think I love the way he plays. I think the way he hustles, the way he's aggressive, the rebound. I think it's amazing how he was able to kind of how he spent time in the gym to just look at to kind of map out where the rebound's going to come. So if Michael shot it from over here, he was going to be there. But then I don't know. He's a character. I think he's funny. Like I need a vacation in the middle of the season. It's like what? Like I don't know who would do that besides Dennis Rodman. So obviously I think I always loved the way he played. I thought he was a very aggressive player, and obviously he's a character. But obviously I do think I did like learning more about the supporting cast because when you talk about the Chicago Bulls, you really only think of Michael Jordan, and obviously he was the most important part of the team. He was the best player, but I do think you don't hear too much about other guys, kind of like Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, John Paxson, Horace Grant, all those guys. I also had an integral part of that team, and I really think it was interesting. But obviously, I learned a lot about Michael Jordan, who obviously you hear all the stories about it, but then getting his mindset into it and what was going on behind the scenes of some of the biggest moments. I think it was amazing.
Yeah, and I say definitely that ending to episode 7 was certainly, you know, that was just something else. I really I don't even know what to say, but I think there was a part in the documentary where he said he didn't want to be a role model, and I think that was just like I think Jordan, he was just held to that standard because he was the most popular athlete in the world at the time, and I think that was kind of unfair to his, just to him in general because when you're talking about role models, you're talking about people that are like great leaders and they're very humble and basically everything that Jordan wasn't as a competitor, and I think it was just unfair, and I think that's why he said people might view me as a bad person after watching this documentary because he was just so, like Justin said, insane, as a basketball player, as a competitor, and people thought he was like a tyrant, with this Bulls team, but it worked. I mean, he won 6 championships, so you can't really knock him for that. But I just, like you guys said, I thought the whole documentary was great. I thought it was really a lot of fun to watch, and just as sports fans with nothing else to watch, it was really something to look forward to every Sunday, and it was just a lot of fun. But I guess one last thing: did this documentary change your stance on who the NBA GOAT was? The NBA GOAT debate after watching this.
I don't know. I've always kind of been in between on the GOAT debate. I mean, I think I've always kind of been on the Michael Jordan side of it because I do think but I don't know. I think LeBron is an all-around better athlete just because of he's bigger in stature. He's a bit stronger. I just think he's a better overall athlete. But then I think if you look at Michael Jordan and his mentality and his mindset and the way he went about the game and the way he pushed other players, and I'm not sure, we don't have a LeBron James documentary yet, so we can't really get his mindset about it. But I think I mean, I don't know. I think this is still a hard one. I mean, obviously completely two different eras of basketball, the 90s and then the 2010s. But I don't know. I think I'm going to go, I think it doesn't really, I think it helped me lean more towards Michael Jordan, I guess, a little bit. Just because if you look at the era they played in the 1990s with all those amazing players, the dominant teams, and for how they were able to win 6 titles in 8 years, and that they were able to dominate one of the most amazing eras of basketball in the NBA. I think that's pretty, that he was able to lead a team to that much success and to do it with just that one team. Because imagine if Jordan didn't take a break to play baseball, I think they could have won 8 straight titles, which would be insane considering you're not in, of course, the Bill Russell era when you have a guy who's taller than everyone else in the league and you can win 11 straight titles like that. But I think that's something to consider, is that the success that Jordan was able to lead the Bulls to, and obviously he was the leader because without him, yes, they were still a good team, but that team wouldn't have won a championship without him. But obviously, I'm not trying to take away from LeBron, and it's a different era with in the NBA, because I think nowadays you have a lot more super teams, where I think in the 90s the teams were a little bit more spread out, but then obviously you have the super teams like the Warriors and the Lakers and the Clippers, and then the Heat and the Big Three down there, and the Celtics in their Big Three. So I think it's a bit different because you had a lot more spread out teams. The talent was a little bit more spread out in the 90s than it is today, where you have about maybe five or seven like top teams in the NBA that could seriously contend for a title, where in the 90s you could have teams that really could, maybe 10 or 11 teams that really could make a run for it. But I don't know. I've still been in between, but I do think having obviously a documentary about Michael Jordan made me lean more towards the Jordan side of it. But until we get that 10-part LeBron documentary, maybe we'll see. It might change.
Mhm.
Yeah, I definitely want that 10-part LeBron documentary for sure. No, it didn't change my opinion at all. I think LeBron James is still the greatest basketball player of all time. It definitely it showed me a lot though in terms of how Michael Jordan became the greatest basketball player of all time, or, you know, in that conversation at least, and really vaulted himself to that point. Because you talk about just the overall kind of trajectory of his career. So he was, you know, he was really, really good in the very beginning under some kind of no-name coaches, and then Doug Collins comes and he becomes a lot, you know, better of just a high volume scorer, and really blossomed into, you know, MVP candidate. I remember that quote that Doug Collins was talking about when he said, you know, he had MVP, he had a slam dunk title, defensive player of the year, all-star MVP, all that different good stuff in 1 year. And then they fired Doug Collins, which I thought was pretty crazy. But, you know, just his ascent to, you know, not only being the best player, you know, in the world at that time, but then, you know, he just kept getting beat up so bad by the Pistons, and they really took over and kind of exposed the one weakness that he had in his game, which was strength from a physical standpoint. And really just, you know, after a while was like, all right, forget this. I'm hitting the weight room, and you know, I want to be the one that's dishing out the contact. So he kind of got over that hump and was able to beat Detroit and had them walking off the court before the game was over. And then, you know, just his kind of surpassing of Johnson and Bird in terms of, you know, the first to get to 3 straight championships. And then the fact that he went and played baseball for a while, and that's a completely different, you know, workout regimen and just lifestyle, eating, you know, like I said, workouts, the way that you kind of use your body and the different areas that you try to target within your body, that's a completely different thing to be able to come back after that. And obviously, you know, they lost the first year he was back, but when he had his first full season, they broke the record for, you know, the best record ever. So to me, I think that he really, really, he definitely helped his case with me. And I think it's really hard to compare the two, but just based off of what you said, Liam, about, you know, LeBron being a physical specimen, and also to me, how he affects his team in terms of winning has really been what set him over the top. And I know he lost 6 NBA finals, but, you know, to me, a lot of those, 3 of them came against the Warriors, which that is just completely not fair. And then you have 2 that came against, or 1 at least, that came against Tim Duncan and Kawhi Leonard, that Spurs team, which was a crazy team to try to go up against. But I always look at, you know, what happened when LeBron left Cleveland versus what happened when Mike left Chicago to go play baseball. And, you know, the Bulls basically went to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Knicks that year. And Scottie Pippen and those guys were really, you know, able to vault that team to a pretty high standpoint. And then you see what happened when LeBron left the Cavs, worst record ever, and, you know, longest losing streak ever, basically. So I feel like, you know, that alone is definitely a high it sticks out to me in terms of their overall GOAT levels, but I also feel like just his physical stature and the ability to make his teammates around him better and just affect winning overall. To me, every team LeBron's been on and he's gone to has started winning pretty much immediately as soon as he's got there. And, you know, a lot of people look at the losses, but I feel like the NBA was such a different, you know, it had such a different look at the time of both of their, you know, playing careers, where there was definitely a lot of competition in Mike's era. But to me, no one's contesting with Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, those Warriors. And then those Spurs teams as well. Those are teams that I feel like could outmatch any team that Michael Jordan played. And so for those reasons, and I feel like just basketball IQ and the ability to affect the game in every single level, points, scoring, rebounds, assists, and defense, I think LeBron, you know, that sets him apart in terms of the overall GOAT standpoint. But it definitely swayed it a little bit, but I'm still on Team Bron for sure.
Yeah, and I think I'd have to agree with you, Justin. I think I'm still Team LeBron just because, and I think, and I'll try and be quick, but I think there's 2 disadvantages that LeBron has in this argument, in this debate that always happens for some reason. I think that 1, his career is not over yet, and he still has time to win more championships, win an MVP, win, you know, get selected to All NBA, whatever, score more career points. LeBron is on pace to be the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. So I think, you know, the fact that his career is not over and they're arguing a man who finished his career, you know, 20 years ago, it doesn't seem fair to me. And I think another thing that people don't really talk about a lot is the fact that LeBron plays in this social media era in this, you know, analytical era where, you know, people bring up random stats that make someone like, I don't know, Julius Randle look better than Kevin Durant. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. But I think, um, you know, and with the social media thing, when LeBron does something bad, it's going to be on everyone's phone, it's going to be on everyone's computer. But whereas for Jordan, only his best highlights were played, on like the very limited, sports talk shows that were going on in like the 80s and 90s. I think people don't really speak about, how, the explosion of just sports media and how that really impacted the way people view LeBron. You don't see all of Jordan's mishaps throughout his career, and they didn't really play any of his mishaps in the documentary. And I'm sure, Jordan had bad games that we'll just never know about because, it's just something we'll never be able to see. But I think I still have to side with Team LeBron. But speaking of LeBron, and just speaking of the NBA in general, and this is something we said we would kind of get to in the show, but so I guess it was not too long ago on Thursday, there was a sneaker designer. So this is a little strange, but his name is John Geiger. He tweeted out June 21st, NBA back. And, there wasn't any sources, anything like that. But then Spencer Dinwiddie, who's a guard for the Brooklyn Nets, he replied, he said that's when he heard teams can start practicing, but he says that the regular season will resume on July 15th. And, we haven't really gotten any official news from the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, or anything like that, with plans to restart the NBA with the whole coronavirus pandemic going on. But, news recently says that teams could play at a bubble site in Orlando, and in Disney World, which would be a lot of fun. But do you guys think the NBA should return this season? And, how should they go about returning?
I think they definitely should. And I think in terms of going about it, I like the idea of the whole kind of Orlando Resorts thing where they basically, are kind of shacking off a whole bunch of players in like a all-out resort and having them stay there and practice and play all their games there. It's kind of like that Space Jam hoop session that was going on during the Michael Jordan filming where they just brought a bunch of players and were playing. I think it definitely should return. I think we're too far in the season to really say that it should just be completely canceled. I do know if they were to cancel it, then I guess the team with the best record in the league would be crowned the NBA champion, which I don't think is necessarily fair because this is the year that, so much has changed in the NBA in terms of the overall standing. I think so many people are just excited to see what happens. You have Kawhi and PG on the Clippers. You have LeBron teaming up with Anthony Davis. You have the Rockets still with James Harden and Russell Westbrook, and then you have all those teams on the East who are still playing very well. And there's some surprises over there as well. Jimmy Butler in Miami was definitely a surprise that I don't think people thought was going to come. And the Pacers are still performing well with Victor Oladipo coming back as well. And then obviously the Bucks are kind of running the table over there. But I think it'd just be an overall travesty to cancel everything. I think there's a lot of ways you can go about it. You could try to shorten it. You could try to just, go straight into a playoff. You can do the thing where they're just, all kind of, like I said, shacked off at the Disney resorts and just kind of having exhibition hoop games without any fans and recording those to see what happens. But I think it'd really be a disappointment if they were to cancel the season. And I think from, a fan standpoint and a money standpoint as well, the best option for the league, of course, health is number one. But if they can ensure that, the coronavirus won't be a problem in anything, then I think the best option would definitely be to resume the season just for the sake of the league itself and for all, not even just sports fans, but just people worldwide. I think that would be a really positive thing to happen in a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, I agree. I think obviously that they should start up the season again and just finish it out. I think it'll bring back some sort of normalcy to the country, and not just like you said, Justin, not just to sports fans, but just to give them something to distract themselves from what's been going on. And I do like the idea of having the teams play at the bubble site in Disney because, I mean, it limits travel. I mean, and then you have all the teams in one place. You don't have them all traveling through airports, which kind of limits their exposure to that someone could get diagnosed with the virus. So I do like that idea. I mean, it would completely change the game for some teams who without having home court advantage. So it would be very interesting to see. I mean, I know, like, for an example, like my Philadelphia 76ers, who are almost unstoppable at home, but then can't seem to
Yeah.
catch a win on the road. I know it'd
Mhm.
affect them to be playing on a neutral court the whole time. So, it'd be interesting to see. I think it'd bring a more level playing field to the NBA that we haven't really seen within these past years with all these super teams and stuff like that. So I think it'd be fun to see that everything would be going on, especially with the bubble site in Disney. I think would be good. I think that's the best way to do it. But I think that's the best way to have the season continue and just try and get it done with and get back to some kind of normal.
Yeah, and I think, in the I'm just interested to see, like, I think that's the biggest thing is, how are they going to give these teams that were, top of their conference the whole year, how are they going to give them that advantage that they deserve? The Bucks, they've been atop the East basically the entire year. How are they going to get some kind of advantage if there is playoffs? Or the Lakers, how are they going to get an advantage over the eighth seed? Like, if they're playing at a neutral site, it's normally, home court advantage. If they do go 7 games, they'll be in Los Angeles, but now it'll all be at a neutral site with no fans. So I'm interested to see how the NBA does that. But, with New York opening up these, facilities and today, and, teams can come back and start practicing, and it seems like we're moving forward to finally a solution to what has just been really just devastating, time, on the sports fans' lives. But do you guys think that this season, whoever wins the championship, whoever wins the MVP, whatever it is, do you think this season deserves an asterisk next to it?
I'd say so. I think so because I mean, it's kind of like an example with a lockout that usually has an asterisk next to it. Whoever wins the championship that year. But I do think so because I mean there were a lot of teams who had a lot of momentum that like when the season was still going that could have carried them to a playoff run. I think I saw a tweet a while ago where it was like the Lakers beat the Clippers and Spurs on back-to-back nights and then the season just ended. Like the Lakers were rolling, so they could have used that momentum to carry them into the playoffs and kind of make a run at the title. So, but then if you completely change the outlook of the league and you're playing all these games on neutral floors that has never been seen in the NBA before for playoffs or any game that's usually home or away, I think that changes a lot. So I think that this season does deserve to have an asterisk because it's a part of history. I mean, it's something that you have to deal with and you have to acknowledge happened. And not saying that the team that will win the championship will deserve it any less, but I do think that the pandemic had an impact on the season and on who will win the championship.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think the pandemic has definitely had an impact. In terms of an asterisk, I'm not sure because a lot of, and then recently in sports, a lot of, questionable championships don't have an asterisk. So you can take the Houston Astros ring, for example, where I personally felt like, and that might just be my bias because I was a Yankees fan, but they didn't get an asterisk next to their title, and there was nothing that said they shouldn't have won it, or it's still their title, they still have it, and there's nothing in terms of a league standpoint where Rob Manfred came and said, this is something that should be looked at as different than the rest, or should have an asterisk next to it. So I definitely think the virus will affect things, and there's no ability to have a home court advantage like you both said, which is it's hard. It's definitely a problem to deal with, but I don't think it should necessarily have an asterisk because they are allowing the teams to still resume and kind of play it out as it would have played out just without the fans. And so from a just strictly talent standpoint, I feel like, you still have the same regime, you still have the same lineups, you still have every player at full capabilities that, was able to do what they did before the virus started. And for some teams, you have some players that are even at stronger health in terms of what they were before. There's a lot of players that haven't been able to shoot, but if you look at guys like Oladipo, for example, who was kind of nursing injury back into full health, Kevin Durant is a huge one that may be able to actually come back and play by the time the the season actually starts again, which will definitely vault Brooklyn into some pretty high contention immediately. I think it's hard to put an asterisk next to it, so I don't think that they should necessarily do that in terms of whoever wins, just because it is kind of a full-on free-for-all in terms of overall competition, and it's still, while there are no fans, it is still, the players and their abilities that are being matched against each other. And so just in terms of a player standpoint, I feel like everyone's kind of had free reign to work on themselves, get themselves better. If you don't have a court, then, I'm sorry for that. Some guys like LeBron is just right in their backyard, and some other guys don't have that. But I do think that it's kind of a free game for all the players to be able to come back at this, with the same amount of time on quarantine and the same ability to get themselves better before they actually come back to full playing.
Yeah, and I think you said exactly what I was thinking, Justin. And you don't really know what kind of training these players have been doing since the quarantine started. Obviously some players are better well off. They have full courts in their homes, and they can just practice and whatever it is. But a lot of these guys, they don't really have the money or the resources to do that. So, but I think with all these teams opening up their training facilities, I think they'll have the time to really get back in shape before the season starts. I think, I think an argument for why people would say this season deserves an asterisk is if, say, someone like Giannis, and then you say the Bucks and Lakers go to the finals, and Giannis contracts the virus, and then he can't play in the finals, and obviously that would hinder the Bucks quite a bit in that matchup. But I feel like it's almost unfair because when you look at last season, we're not saying that the Raptors need an asterisk, despite the fact that Kevin Durant tore his Achilles and Klay Thompson tore his ACL. It's different because obviously it's different in the same thing. I think in that it's just spontaneous. You really never know who's going to get this virus, but you also never know who's going to get injured. I don't think anybody saw Klay Thompson tearing his ACL last season, or I don't think anyone saw Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love getting injured in the 2015 playoffs, with the Cavs, and LeBron single-handedly, trying to beat the Warriors in 2015. I don't think people say that the Warriors deserve an asterisk for that. So I think in that sense, I'd say I don't know if it necessarily deserves an asterisk, but it's definitely going to be interesting. I think the biggest thing is without the fans, with the fact that the NBA and basketball is just such a game of runs and a game of momentum. It'll be so interesting to see how these teams fare without, fans cheering and getting in their heads, and how that changes, the whole dynamic of the game. But I think we've talked quite a bit about basketball, and I think we should talk a little bit about football and some of that news. So, and I know you guys are fans of the NFC East, so I think this would be fun to talk about. I know, Justin, I'm pretty sure you're a Cowboys fan, so this should be good. And Liam, you're an Eagles fan, so you should just hate this, or maybe you like it. But so there was news that Dak Prescott, who's the quarterback of the Cowboys, that they were saying that he turned down a 5-year, $175 million contract, but then Ian Rappaport, who works at NFL Network, said that was not true. And that was something that Prescott's agent never really discussed with the team. But what we do know is that Prescott, he turned down a deal that would have paid him $33 million earlier this year in February. And then the Cowboys placed a franchise tag on him in March. So this season he'll be with the Cowboys, that's for sure. But going forward, he does not have a long-term deal done with the Cowboys. So my question is, do you think that the Cowboys will get this deal done with Dak Prescott?
I'll start this one off, being a Cowboys fan. I don't even know, man, to be honest. I think that I have a lot of problems with the way that Dallas's front office is handling things. I feel like Dak Prescott should have been their number one priority in terms of a long-term contract, and they paid Ezekiel Elliott big money to come back after he kind of took an excursion to Cabo and did his thing down there. I guess they got kind of scared that they wouldn't have his services for the season, so they gave him his big contract. They gave Amari Cooper a big long-term contract, and they've really made some waves elsewhere as well. They signed Alden Smith. They, just drafted C.D. Lamb, who's another receiver, and they're still holding on to Michael Gallup, even though he's been in a lot of trade talks and rumors. But to me, your quarterback is the most important part of your team and your franchise's future. And they even went and, traded for, I don't know if I think they signed Andy Dalton, former Bengals quarterback, who, I kind of felt like it's good to get a backup, but I feel like, they're kind of playing a game of cat and mouse with Dak Prescott and really saying, okay, if you don't adhere to what we want you to do and kind of just shut up and stop, asking for more money or trying to up the ante with the price, you're replaceable. And it's my opinion that Dak Prescott's really not replaceable. It's not that easy to find a top tier quarterback like that in the National Football League. He's not, in that, I feel like, let's say, first tier of quarterbacks. I feel like that's, Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, those guys. But he's definitely in that, I would say, a top 10, top 15 quarterback in the National Football League. And, he's definitely proved his worth over time. He's made playoff appearances. He has a playoff win under his belt. He, led the league for a long time in passer rating throughout the season. He was the highest rated long, deep ball passer in the National Football League this year as well. And so to me, that resume, he hasn't won a whole lot in terms of playoff standing. But that's a really hard thing to do. And to me, when you have a quarterback like that, that's not only a vocal leader in the locker room and kind of has been that since day one, but also has the stat production to back it up. He was a top 5 passer and not only yards, but rating as well. To me, that's something that you really should hold on to. And so this back and forth between the two, I think, is going to either end up in, a contract being signed and both sides being happy about it, or just walking away from it. I think it's an either or situation, but it's my opinion that they need to just buck up and give him a good deal. That deal that you're talking about, Jorie, the 5 years, you said $175 million, right? I thought I thought he was a complete idiot if he were to turn that down, but I guess he didn't turn it down. I guess it wasn't a real deal, but that would have been the highest paid player in the league, period. And so you look at guys like Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. If you're getting more money than those guys, then obviously they're going to get their contracts when their time comes. That's pretty good. So I don't know. I guess that deal was fake according to Ian Rappaport. I'm not sure, but I hope they get a deal done. I don't know if they will, though, because it both seems like they're kind of just, shoved themselves into their respective corners and are really being stubborn about it. So we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think they'll probably get something done before the year is, because I don't think that the Cowboys want to lose Dak, but I think I honestly think that the deal that would have paid him $33 million per year, and then even the what's it called, the $31 million per year for the franchise tag is substantial enough for Dak Prescott. I mean, if I was looking at a list from USA today that was ranking the top, how much the top paid quarterbacks that make each year, and then even if he did the $31 million from the franchise tag, that would put him at 5th behind Carson Wentz, who's $32 million a year, and then he'd be one ahead of Matt Ryan, who's, I forget what it was, I think around like $30 million a year. So I think if you'd be 5th, making the 5th most money per year for quarterbacks, where I think the top one was Russell Wilson, where he's making like $35 million per year. So I think that would have been a good deal for Prescott there, that he would have been able to kind of be paid up in the upper echelon of quarterbacks and what they're making per year. But I think it might have to do with the length of the contract and the total, and then kind of like the details of it, of like the incentives and stuff like that, of how much he gets paid on that, and not just the base salary. But I think that the Cowboys are going to have to get a deal done, because I think they're going to realize that they can't afford to lose Dak before the season, because I think at that point it's just going to be, you have all these weapons at wide receiver like Cooper, Gallup, and Lamb, and you don't want a mediocre quarterback throwing to them. You want someone who can get them the ball if you want to reach your team's full potential this season. So I do think that they're gonna get one done eventually, but it'll just be, we'll see if it's on Dak's terms or the Cowboys' terms.
Yeah, and I think, I think in the NFL, I think the quarterback position, it's just a little different the way, salaries work and how these players get paid. Because I think Dak, I think Dak is a top 10 quarterback. I think he definitely deserves the money, but he might not be the best quarterback. He might not deserve the most money at the quarterback position in the NFL. But that's just how these contracts normally work. We saw a few years ago with Jared Goff. I believe he was once the highest paid quarterback in the league. So, he took the Rams to a Super Bowl, but I wouldn't say Jared Goff is the best quarterback in the NFL. I don't think Kirk Cousins, who's making $33 million a year, was the best quarterback in the NFL when he was the highest paid. So it's not necessarily who's the best at the position. It's just who's ever next in line really is just gonna reset the quarterback market, and we see that every single year. And I think Dak, I think he's just next in line. And then when Patrick Mahomes, when he's up for his new contract, he's just gonna do the same thing. And people, it'll be easy justified considering Mahomes, he's already got a Super Bowl MVP, and MVP. I think it'll be easier for the Chiefs to pay him. But I think the Cowboys are just gonna have to give in. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up paying him and making him the highest paid quarterback. Like you guys said, they just have too many. Their team is just too good right now to not pay him. I think with, like you said, Amari Cooper, who's one of the top receivers in the league. They just paid him. They just paid Zeke, and then they just drafted CeeDee Lamb, who's wasn't necessarily a position of need for that team, but it's going to make that offense even more potent than it already was. So I think letting Dak walk could really hinder this team. And that kind of goes into my last question that we have. What kind of impact, if Dak Prescott left the Cowboys, what kind of impact would that have on the team, and what would that mean for the rest of that division, the NFC East?
Well, I think the impact it has is that Andy Dalton is now your starting quarterback. So, so it is a pretty big impact. The difference between Dalton and Prescott is big. I mean, Dalton did have his good days in Cincinnati. He led the Bengals to a couple playoff appearances. I don't know if they ever made it anywhere in the playoffs, but I do think it has a big impact because, I mean, the quarterback position nowadays is to find a guy who's pretty good consistently and can play at a high level. I think it's hard to find. So I think the Cowboys, they want to keep that, and I think Dak Prescott is another weapon for the Cowboys to use. Obviously, as an Eagles fan, I think that as the division goes, the Eagles still win the division, but but obviously, I think it will affect it. Obviously, if Prescott leaves, then I think obviously the division is kind of almost like, all right, well, the Eagles don't win this division, then what's wrong with them? Because if you have those kind of players, but then I think if Prescott's the quarterback, I think it makes it a very close, even matchup between the Eagles and the Cowboys, between who will win the division. I think that's how it's been for the past, I don't know, like 5-6 years between the Cowboys and Eagles, except for the exception of the years where the Giants were good and won a Super Bowl in 2011, and then of course the RG3 year where the Redskins won the division. But I think it's usually been between the Cowboys and the Eagles. So I think, again, it's going to come down to this. It'll probably come down to another Week 16 matchup to decide the division. But I think the Cowboys can't afford to lose Prescott if they want to win and make a run at the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Without Dak Prescott, the team's pretty much nothing. That's how I look at it. You have that, high, just plethora of disposal of players at your disposal, and to me, drafting a receiver like CeeDee Lamb means absolutely nothing if you don't have a guy that can give him the football. And also signing, Zeke to a long-term deal doesn't really mean anything if you don't have a quarterback that can work with him and play with him. That's what we saw in the 90s era with the Cowboys was, okay, Emmitt Smith was one of the greatest running backs of all time. Michael Irvin was one of the greatest receivers of all time. And they were both probably, arguably top 3, top 4 at their position in that era. But Troy Aikman was also one of the best quarterbacks of that era, and he was definitely the fuel that made that engine go. And so I think it's the same exact thing with Dak Prescott. I don't want to see what that offense will look like if Andy Dalton is at the helm, because Andy Dalton, he was pretty good for a while in Cincinnati, but he's no Dak Prescott whatsoever. And I think we're all aware of that. So if they don't get something done with him, if the Cowboys do become a Dak Prescott list team, to me it pretty much is the Eagles division, like you said, Liam. I think there's really no way that I don't see the Giants doing anything this year. They definitely drafted some offensive linemen to kind of help with that Saquon Barkley ordeal that they have going on down there. And Daniel Jones, to me, is not the quarterback right now to be able to get them over the hump. Same thing with Washington. I don't have any faith in Dwayne Haskins, really. And their whole front office is just a really big kind of crap show right now. So to me, yeah, you're basically saying that the Eagles, you might as well just give them the division if Dak Prescott's not their quarterback. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think you guys make great points. I just feel like people forget really how good Dak is. I think people just see him as this like game manager almost. I don't think that's the case. Last year he threw for 4,900 yards and 30 touchdowns. In his first season with the Cowboys, he went 13-3. Like, he's not just some like scrub quarterback. He's really a top 10 quarterback, and I think he deserves the money for sure. And if they lose him, that could really just completely hinder this entire team potential. Spending time looking for another quarterback, it just they could just lose so many valuable years that they have with this young core on offense. And like you said, I think the Eagles would just run that division if that were the case. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun this year watching, that division compete against each other for sure. But I think, that's really all the topics that, we wanted to cover for sure for this show. So I guess I would just ask, do you have any last things to say?
Dennis Rodman. And I thought about this about the Last Dance. Dennis Rodman's little wrestling thing with Hulk Hogan at I don't know what, I think it was WWF. That we'll never see anything like that again. This dude practiced during the NBA Finals to go wrestle. That was one of my favorite moments from the Last Dance too. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and then going back to the Dennis Rodman thing, I think one of my favorite quotes from that point, you bring it up, made me think of it, is that one of the reporters asked Phil Jackson do you think it hurts your chances that it hurts your chances that he's taking your focus off the finals? And he said back, he's not taking our focus off the finals, he's taking your focus off the finals, because they're too worried about what Rodman's doing, they're not focused on the game. So I think that even with Rodman's sideshow and his antics on the side, I think it's pretty great to see how Jackson was able to keep the team level-headed and that they were still able to focus on the finals. But then other than that, I just hope all our faithful WSOU listeners and their families were staying safe during this time, and that, hopefully this will all be over soon and we can get back to some Seton Hall basketball and Seton Hall sports in general.
Likewise.
Yeah, and, that's exactly, I would say the same thing. Just, make sure everyone's staying safe. Being smart, and we'll get through this for sure. But that's all the time we have, really. And I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of our WSOU Zoom Sports Talk. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages at WSOU Sports on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. For myself, Jorie Mickens, Liam Plate, Justin Morris. Thank you so much for tuning in, and stay safe, everyone.